Before we get started, in case there's anybody who's here kind of last minute, just skimmed their email and signed on, there are 3 handouts that go with this presentation today. So if you haven't had a chance to print them off, now's your chance to quickly grab them. If you don't have access to a printer, just bring them up on your screen. You'll get a lot more out of today's presentation if you're able to have those handy. The other piece that I want to mention, as was already kind of suggested, is if we do have any closet multitaskers out there right now, I really would encourage you to, if you're able to, give yourself permission right now to set everything aside and really become present in this presentation today. Acceptance and commitment therapy, for folks who aren't familiar with this, is a third wave CBT strategy, and it's a very experienced process-based approach. And so my hope today is to try to bring some of that to you, to get some experiential exercises. And ACT is famous for its use of metaphor. And one of the metaphors we use is learning to play a guitar. So you can watch videos about learning to play a guitar, you can talk about playing a guitar, you can read about playing a guitar, but until you actually pick it up and try it, you're not going to be playing a guitar, and you're probably not going to play Stairway to Heaven on your first try. So this is an opportunity to really try to experience and practice, and I really encourage folks to make a commitment to themselves for the next hour in order to participate in today's presentation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to start by throwing up a first poll, which we're going to see how this works. I'm going to be using the polling as a way to engage everybody today throughout this presentation. This presentation is going to be a little bit different than the others in that it's going to stretch through most of today's talk, and I'm hoping to engage everyone throughout the presentation. So please, if you're able to participate in the polls, please do. Our first poll is going to be asking you, how alive do you feel right now? So we've been asking people how good they feel, how burnt out they feel, but this is more of an ACT question. Do you feel like your life is full of vitality at the current time? Do you feel like you're sometimes able to be present both mentally and physically, or do you feel like you're just kind of showing up right now but your mind is elsewhere? So if everyone could just take a moment and fill that in, and we'll get a sense of where people are at. All right, so we've got a nice mix here. We've got a couple people who are full of vitality. We've got some people who are kind of in the middle, and then of course some folks who are kind of showing up but not feeling that they're all that mentally present. And this is what ACT is going to be about. We're going to be focusing more on how do we become present, how are we able to show up both physically and mentally. There we go. So we might have a bit of a delay. We've noticed with the poll function that that's sometimes a bit of a hiccup. So this is all a bit of an experiment for us both. So welcome to this presentation. I love the term reality gap. We sometimes use this in the ACT world when there's a gap between what we want and what we've got. And these are precisely the times that we're going to be feeling stressed, anxious, anger, whatever's really showing up for us today. And my hope for this presentation for you is that we're able to provide some suggestions for self-care during these times of uncertainty. So as I mentioned before, ACT is really fond of metaphor as opposed to using more kind of like a didactic piece. And so the first metaphor we're going to talk about is the choice point. And so the choice point is just one of many ways to frame challenges, but this is one that I particularly like, and it's what I'm going to base my presentation on. So rather than me talk about what the choice point is, I'm going to show you a video of one of the co-creators of this who's going to do a much nicer job of explaining about the choice point.
All day long, humans do things. Even if it's just sleeping. Now, some things we do move us towards the sort of life we want. When we're behaving like the sort of person we want to be, doing things that make life richer, fuller, more meaningful, we can call these towards moves. Now, other things we do move us away from the life we want to live. When we're acting ineffectively, behaving unlike the sort of person we want to be, doing things that tend to make life worse in the long term, we can call these away moves. Now, when things are going well, when life is giving us what we want, it's pretty easy for us to choose towards moves to act effectively, doing stuff that makes life richer and more meaningful. But unfortunately, life just isn't that easy most of the time, and it doesn't give us what we want for very long. So as we go about our day, all sorts of difficult situations and difficult thoughts and feelings will arise. We may experience emotions such as worry, we may catastrophize, predict the worst, we may have thoughts popping up that I'm not good enough, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, life sucks, it's all too hard. Now, unfortunately, we easily get hooked by those difficult thoughts and feelings. And almost every psychological problem, from stress and anxiety to depression and addiction, boils down to this basic process. We get hooked by difficult thoughts and feelings, and we do away moves. However, there are times when most of us are able to unhook from these difficult thoughts and feelings and choose towards moves instead. And the better we get at doing this, the better life gets. So that's what this approach is all about. We're going to bring in some helpers to help you get a lot better at choosing towards moves. As a first step, we're going to help you identify your values. Who you care about, what matters to you, what sort of person you want to be, and use those values to guide and inspire and motivate you to do more towards moves. And we're also going to develop unhooking skills so you can get a lot better and a lot faster at unhooking yourself from all those difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories. The more we develop our ability to unhook and choose those towards moves that really matter deep in our heart, the greater our quality of life, the greater our health, happiness, and well-being.
That's the choice point, and what we're going to be talking about, I seem to have lost control again of my slide. There we go. So that's what our presentation is going to be looking at today. We're going to be focusing it around the choice point. We're going to be doing some exercises to get in touch with our values. We're going to be learning the difference between values and goals. We're going to learn how to pull each of them from the other. And we're going to learn to develop some unhooking skills as well. So the first exercise that we want to do to really understand how this works is we want to do the thoughts of hands exercise. So this is a really fundamental act metaphor that really illustrates what we mean by getting hooked versus unhooked. And it's such a fundamental exercise that I didn't even think twice about including it in today's presentation. And of course, right now, we're not supposed to touch our faces. So I will invite you to do this exercise with me, but please leave a safe distance between your hands and your face. So it's going to be tough to see my hands via the Zoom, but what I want you to do is just take a moment and look over your computers or out into space wherever you're sitting. And I want you to imagine that everything that you're looking at out there is everything that matters to you. So all the people you care about, the things that you enjoy doing, anything that's really meaningful for you, as well as any of the very real problems that every one of us as people have that we need to solve. And I want you to imagine that your hands represent your thoughts, feelings, urges, physical sensations, anything on the inside that nobody else is going to know about unless you told them. And when we get hooked by these experiences, it's kind of like our hands are up here. So I'll invite folks who are willing to try this. Just put your hands up in front of your face. And I want you to see how easy it is from this position to be actually doing any of the things that matter to you, connecting with any of the people that matter to you, or solving any of the problems that are going on. It's going to be pretty tough. So when we get unhooked, what we're doing is getting some space. So you can lower your hands, rest them in your lap. That's what we're aiming towards, so that we're able to look at our experiences rather than through our experiences. And just like you can't get rid of your hands, you're not going to be able to get rid of these inner experiences. So this is the part where I kind of apologize to folks. I wish there was a way to get rid of this stuff. But ACT is actually one of the few things that's very explicit that you really can't get rid of stress, anxiety, difficulties. In difficult situations, we're going to feel that. We probably wouldn't really want to get rid of them. There's actually some benefits to some of these experiences, but not if they take over. So we want to be able to get space so that we're able to look at it and make some effective choices. Now, people often say, okay, I'm able to get unhooked. What do I do then? How do I guide what those choices are going to be? And the way that we're going to do that is by learning some skills to get unhooked and then looking at things like values. So I'm going to start with the first unhooking skill. And for folks who are kind of thinking, what are you talking about with this unhooking? It's just another term for mindfulness. So if people like the term mindfulness, you can use mindfulness, but some people don't like mindfulness. For some people, it brings up a lot of meaning that maybe isn't really accurate about mindfulness. Maybe people have had some bad experiences with it. So we don't actually have to use the term. And the other challenge with mindfulness is it can mean so many different things that it no longer really means anything anymore. Russ Harris, who's a sort of a superstar in the ACT world, actually refers to it as a bit of a dodgy word right now. So as I say, if you like the word mindfulness, you can use it. If you don't like mindfulness, we certainly don't need to use it. Another common myth is that mindfulness means you have to meditate, and you certainly don't have to. If meditation is something you enjoy, you can absolutely do mindfulness meditations. There's plenty of them, but if you're someone like me who gets kind of antsy and it's just not something that you find very helpful, there's a lot of non-meditative mindfulness skills. And so I'm going to introduce one of those right now, which is one of my personal favorites, which is dropping anchor. This is a nice grounding technique. In ACT, it's an example of a non-meditative ACT exercise. And for folks who are familiar with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, this is the ACT spin on that. So we're gonna do this together. But before we do, I just want people to take a moment and think about what dropping anchor means. Why would we drop an anchor? And usually the reason is we want to stop a boat. And if there was a storm coming, we would want to drop an anchor so that we don't get swept away by the storm that's coming. And this is the same idea of what we're doing with the dropping anchor, is we want to just hold ourselves still amidst the emotional thoughts, feelings, whatever's going on inside storm. But just like with an anchor, dropping an anchor in a boat, if you drop the anchor in a storm, you're not going to make the storm go away. And the same thing is with this exercise. Just because we hold ourselves still doesn't mean that that inner storm is going to stop. Now, some people find that when they let go of the struggle with some of these experiences, that they do pass relatively quickly. But again, if you're in a high stress situation, you're going to feel stress. The idea is to hold ourselves still so that we don't get swept away and that we can have the ability to make an effective choice rather than getting hooked by these experiences and moving into autopilot. So we're going to do this exercise together. This is another one of those experiential opportunities. And just like if you're learning any new technique, before you do the nice smooth version, you got to do kind of the clunky, exaggerated version. So if anybody's mind starts to chatter while they're doing this, that this isn't practical and how am I going to do this in the real world, this is the exaggerated version. If you do practice it, you can make it much quicker, and we'll talk a little bit about that after. So the first step is to just take a really quick check-in. So I'm going to invite everybody in the audience today to just really quickly check in with yourselves. Notice any thoughts that are going through your mind. Notice any feelings that you might be experiencing, physical sensations, urges. And if you're able to name them in your mind, that's even better. So if you're noticing worry thoughts, if you're noticing, stress, tension, maybe a bit of confusion showing up, just acknowledge that that's there. Once you've done that really quick check-in, we're going to move around a little bit. So this can be subtle. If you're in a public space right now, feel free to just wiggle your toes, your fingers, maybe press your feet into the ground. You can kind of press your fingers together just to get some movement in your arms. If you're in more of a private location and you want to kind of move around a little bit, get your arms and legs moving, go for it. If somebody wants to get up and do an interpretive dance, that'd be fantastic. The idea is we're trying to come into our body. So we first checked in on what's going on the inside. Second step is coming into your body and reminding yourself that no matter what's going on the inside, you're still in control of your arms and your legs. You still have control over what comes out of your mouth. So we just want to remind ourselves that in whatever way we need to do. Third step is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that some folks might be familiar with, where you just want to count down from 5 to 1, looking at things you can taste, touch, smell, hear, any of your senses. If you're like where I am now and there's absolutely no sound, and for whatever reason, every time I run this exercise, there's never any sound, you can make it entirely visual. I might ask people to look for 5 objects in the room, maybe look for 4 colors that you can see, maybe 3 shapes. If there's a couple things you can touch, you know, just sort of touch them. Are they smooth? Are they rough? Is it hard? Is it soft? If you happen to have a snack nearby and you want to put it into your mouth and just notice the taste. And if you're outdoors and you have maybe some access to some scents, just take a moment to notice what you can smell or what you can hear. What we're doing in this last step is expanding our awareness. We're becoming present. If you're anything like I am, when you get hooked by these experiences, we tend to get hyper-focused on the inside and we start to lose touch with what's going on around us. So we want to learn to be able to shift our attention from inside to out. Some people ask, well, why even bother doing the first 2 steps? Why not just do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? And the reason why in ACT we include the step of checking in is if you're not aware of what's going on the inside, it's kind of like the teacher leaving the classroom. The students are going to run amok, the thoughts and feelings are going to run amok, and you run a much higher risk of going into what we refer to as autopilot, where you're just going to react to what's happening rather than being able to make a choice. So we want to know what's going on the inside. We want to come into our bodies in whatever way makes sense, just to remind ourselves we're still in control. And then we want to expand our awareness, become present, recognize there's a whole world around us, and mindfully shift that attention. And if going through this once is all you need to do, then you're good to go. If you're finding that there's a real storm, you might have to do this several times, and you just keep repeating the cycle. Now, for folks who are thinking, how does this apply to me in the real world? It can be really quick once you get into the habit of practicing it. So if I'm stuck in a traffic jam, I can really quickly acknowledge that I'm frustrated, maybe wiggle my fingers a little bit, become aware of my environment and make a choice of how I'm going to respond. If I'm in a session with a client and someone, you know, says something that really kind of gets to me, I can drop an anchor in the session and just sort of ground myself so that I can make a choice of what's going to be the most effective action. That's the goal behind doing this exercise. So in terms of how do we choose what that effective action is going to be, that's where ACT really brings in values. And values isn't a new thing, but it's one of the things that ACT is extremely explicit in using, and it's a really key part to anything that we do. Now, values can mean a lot of different things in the English language, and ACT is very specific in how it uses it. So if we have any linguists in the audience, you can kind of think of values as almost being like an adverb, whereas a goal is more like a noun. If that's more confusing to you than before, goals are things that you can achieve. They're kind of the what in terms of what we do, whereas values are kind of our why. Why are we doing these things? What matters to us? What do we want to stand for? So instead of me continuing to go on about the difference between values and goals, I'm going to show you another video of Russ Harris. So I'm going to apologize in advance because I have a hunch we're going to have a few technical glitches along the way, but bear with us and we're going to learn a little bit more about values.
Society tells us the way to be happy is to achieve our goals, get that great job, earn that money, get a good body, find a partner, have happy, healthy kids, have a big house, have a nice car, have holidays. Goal, 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 goal. And it's true that if you do actually manage to achieve these goals, then there is a little moment of joy and happiness. But how long does it last? How long before you're looking at the next goal, and then the next goal, and then the next goal? And as we live our life trying to constantly strive to achieve these goals, one after the other after the other, how tiring and exhausting does it get? Is this you? There is a radically different way to live your life, which is a life based on values, a values-focused life. It's like two kids in the back of a car, and it's a 3-hour car journey to Disneyland. And the first kid is totally goal-focused. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? How much longer? Are we there yet? This journey of frustration, it's all about the goal. The second kid is values-focused. He's got the same goal. He wants to get to Disneyland. But he's also in touch with his values around curiosity, adventure, having fun. So he's looking out of the window, playing I Spy with My Little Eye. He's counting all the, the interesting farmhouses that he sees on the way. He's spotting interesting farm animals, cows and sheep. He's noticing different types of trucks and cars on the freeway. So he's actually appreciating the journey as he heads towards his goal. Now, they both reach Disneyland at the same time. They both have a fantastic time at Disneyland because they both got to achieve the goal. But the first kid had a journey of frustration. The second kid had a fulfilling, rewarding journey. Then on the way home, the first kid, are we home yet? Are we home yet? Are we home yet? All about the goal, all that frustration. Second kid's looking out of the window, noticing how the world looks different at night, spotting the lights in the farmhouses and the cat's eyes on the freeway. The car breaks down on the way to Disneyland. Now, both kids are really disappointed because neither of them achieved their goal. But the second kid at least had a fulfilling journey up until that point. Now, when the pickup truck arrives to tow them home, the first kid, oh, it's not fair. I want to go to Disneyland. How long before the car gets repaired? It's not fair. It's not fair. The second kid starts to notice how the world looks different when you're sitting in the front of a pickup truck high above the level of the rest of the traffic. So this is the very important distinction between the values-focused life and the goal-focused life. In the values-focused life, we have the fulfillment and satisfaction of living our values every step of the way towards our goals, the satisfaction of achieving our goals, and the fulfillment that comes of living our values even when we don't achieve our goals.
All right, so I think now is a good opportunity just to take a brief pause and see if there's anything coming up on the chat, or if anybody wants to make any comments via their Zoom. I'd be curious what some of the comments would be or reactions to that video.
I wonder what people might say about how our work environment as healthcare providers, as physicians, influences how these values and goals sort of collide at times.
I know we've got one comment on the chat about it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, age-old saying, and that's absolutely correct. It's almost a cliche, but the question becomes, how do we actually live that life? How do we actually make those choices? We have another chat coming up, you know now, and you know how. I love it. And we do have someone coming in, values competing between our work and our personal life. I actually really love that somebody came up and said that, because this is a common theme that comes up. People say, I have a values conflict between different domains of life. And our next exercise is going to be bullseye, which is the first handout that you guys have. So hopefully people have had a chance to bring it up. And this will be kind of an interesting experiment for folks who are finding that they feel they have a bit of a values conflict between work and personal life. So I'm tempted to kind of dive into a comment, but I think before I do that, I'd like to get everybody involved in the bullseye first, and then let's see what actually comes out in that. So the bullseye is just one of many tools that can be used to start to get in touch with what our values are. And it's broken down into 4 life domains, sort of the work, love, health, and play. These aren't the only domains in life, but they're common ones. I've also given everybody a values checklist in 4 domains just to kind of help get in touch with some of those values. And what I'd like everyone to do now is, while I'm kind of babbling away here and we might look at a little bit more chat, is I'd like people to take that bullseye handout and actually start to reflect on what some of your values are in some of those different domains. You might be in touch with your values and able to start jotting values down in all 4 domains. You might want to just focus on one domain that's particularly important to you right now, maybe 1 or 2 domains. Because values are really tricky and goals can kind of creep their way in there, the handout is there just to kind of give you a little bit of help, but you certainly don't need to use it. Be aware of a few traps that can come up. So if anyone's sort of saying, I'm going to be a good doctor, that's my value right now, be aware that as soon as the word good shows up, it's good versus bad. And so that's actually a judgment, and we want to be careful about not falling into judgment traps. If you're finding that all of this really isn't that helpful and you're still kind of stuck on what a value is, another exercise you can do is, we call it the documentary exercise, where pick any of those domains, whether it's relationships or work or whatever it is that you want to focus on, and ask yourself, if I were to pick 3 people, so if work is your domain that you want to focus on, if I were to pick 3 colleagues or 3 patients, or if relationships is what you're focusing on, if I were to pick 3 people in your life that matter to you and I were to interview them, and if all your dreams came true, what would you hope they said about the way that you treated them? How did you interact with them? What were the qualities that you brought to that relationship? Were you fun? Were you reliable? Were you kind? Were you loving? That's what we're trying to get at when we're looking at values. So take a moment and just sort of see what comes up for you in terms of thinking of what some of your values are. If people are really in touch with their values and they're ahead of the game, the next step in the bullseye is to just kind of see where you were at in terms of living the life that in line with your values. So if you're right on the bullseye, that means that you are 100% behaving exactly the way that you want to be all the time. If you're like the rest of the world, you're going to find yourself a little bit distant from that. And this can be a really great way to start to kind of look at what matters to you, and are there certain values or certain areas that you feel it would be helpful to actually focus on and take some steps towards. So I'm just going to give people a moment. Again, I want to open up the chat if there's any comments people want to make about this or about anything that we've covered so far. Comments, questions, feedback, please feel free to jump in. Great chats coming up. So you're either here now or nowhere. Yoga wisdom, also old wisdom. Someone else is saying General Schwarzkopf from the First Gulf War said most people know the right thing to do. The hard part is doing it, and that's absolutely true. Knowing what our values are is part of that process, and then learning how to get unhooked from all that stuff going on in the inside is how we start to take some of those steps. So now that everyone's hopefully had a chance to think about it, I want to come back to that comment about values competing. Just take a look at what you've written down. I'd be curious, and feel free again to jump in and comment if you like, but I'd be curious if people are noticing a huge difference in their values across domains, or if people are finding that there's some similarities there. What may happen, it may not, but what often happens is we start to notice that a lot of times our values actually aren't all that different across different domains. If I want to be a compassionate person in my work, I probably want to be a compassionate person in my relationships. I probably still want to be compassionate in my leisure. And what often happens is what we think of as values conflicts, more often than not, are actually time conflicts. Often the values of who we want to be and what we want to stand for in life often doesn't change too dramatically regardless of what life domain we're focusing on. But what the challenge actually is how much time are we going to choose to devote to each one. And so kind of thinking more about how much time in my day am I going to devote to my relationships, how can I fit my work life in, can I make room for personal health. And I see a couple of people actually posting that as well, some similarities, but perhaps it is a time issue, and that's usually the challenge that we have. So now that we've had a chance to kind of start to get in touch with our values, we're going to learn a second unhooking skill. So this one is more of a meditative mindfulness. So I wanted to give everybody a bit of a taste of both types. I chose this one specifically for two reasons. One, given that whether I'm working with clients or patients or whether I'm doing professional training, I find that this is one I tend to get better feedback on. People tend to like it a little bit more. The second reason is this is an example of, in the metacognitive literature, we refer to this as more of a detached mindfulness skill. So this is a particularly useful skill if you happen to notice yourself being prone to worry or rumination thoughts. It's a nice way of just getting a little bit of space and stepping off that worry rumination cycle. So for this one, before I do it, I always like to comment on everybody thinks differently. So some of us think more in terms of images, some of us think more in terms of words. Some of us close our eyes and it's like watching a movie, and some people have aphantasia where you don't see anything at all, and most of us fall somewhere in the middle. So if you happen to be one of those people who thinks more in terms of words or doesn't see any images, I don't want you to get hooked by thoughts that you're not doing this right or this isn't helpful. Use it in whatever way makes sense for you. Think of it in words if you tend to think in words. If you just see absolutely nothing, you can imagine moving blackness or a gaping hole, whatever kind of makes sense for you. But just notice if you're getting hooked by thoughts about whether you're doing the exercise right. So with that, I'm going to invite everybody to close their eyes if they're comfortable. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just take a moment to find a place where you're located where you can just sort of gaze. And we're just going to start by taking some nice deep inhales and some long, slow exhales. And as we're inhaling and exhaling, I'm going to invite you to imagine that you're sitting next to a gently flowing stream with leaves floating along the surface of the water. And for the next few moments, I'm going to invite you to take any thought that comes through your mind, whether it's a pleasurable thought, a painful thought, or even just a neutral thought. Even if you're having joyous and enthusiastic thoughts, take any thought that's coming through your mind, place it on a leaf, and let it float by. If you're noticing that the same thought keeps popping up over and over again, that's okay. Put it on a leaf as many times as you need to. If a leaf gets stuck, just observe it. Let it move in its own time. If your thoughts suddenly stop, that's okay too. Just observe the stream. Sooner or later, your thoughts will come up again. If you're noticing emotions or physical sensations, just label what they are. Maybe you're feeling anxiety, maybe frustration or boredom, maybe calmness. Just notice whatever's there, label it, place it on a leaf, and let it float by. If you start to have thoughts about the exercise, maybe thoughts of this is dumb, or I don't get it, or I'm not doing this right, recognize that those are thoughts as well. Place them on a leaf and let them float by. And allow the stream to flow at its own pace. We're not trying to move the leaves along. We're not trying to get rid of our thoughts. We're just allowing them to come and to go in their own time. And as you do this exercise, you're going to repeatedly get hooked and distracted by your thoughts. This is normal. It's what our minds do. When you notice that you've become distracted from the exercise, gently and kindly shift your attention back to the stream, place the thought on a leaf, and let it float by. When you're ready, leave the stream behind. Open your eyes if they're closed, and welcome back. So I realized I forgot to do a poll on the dropping anchor. So we're gonna put a poll up for the leaves on a stream right now. And I just like to get a little bit of feedback. So just kind of rapid feedback from everyone, just to get a sense of what people's experiences were of this exercise. Normally, if I'm doing this in person, I get the opportunity to kind of observe and see what's happening. And it's kind of tricky not being able to see that now. Generous group of people who found this really helpful. We got a couple of I don't knows and a few others. I always like to see if there's any brave soul in the audience who'd be willing to kind of share either through chat or through Zoom what their other experience was, or kind of not being sure. We've got one person on the chat saying that it's very similar to a hypnosis induction exercise that they found quite helpful. The thing about, I've got some posts saying it was calming. If you notice calm, enjoy the calm. So I don't want to give people the message that if they felt calm, it's a bad thing. Enjoy it when it lasts, but it's the same message as with dropping anchor. Sometimes we won't feel calm, and sometimes when we're, again, in a really high stress situation or our thoughts are going a mile a minute, we might not always come away from this feeling really relaxed. So if you are someone who kind of came away from it thinking like, I don't know what I was supposed to feel, the goal is not necessarily to feel good. Again, it's just to be able to take a step back from those experiences, those thoughts, step off the worry cycle so that you're able to make an effective choice. And the skill actually comes from being able to notice when you got hooked to being able to move away from being hooked. So some people think that they got to be really zen and just meditate all the way through. That's not what we're aiming for. What we're actually aiming for is a greater awareness of, oh wow, I've just done 5 cycles of this worry thought. Maybe this isn't really where I want to be focusing all of my attention right now. And I'm noticing, again, we've got some chats coming in that people felt a little anxious at the start, but more aware of their breath as the exercise progressed. So that's wonderful. So just sometimes going to delay and be able to move the slide. So we've had an opportunity, we've had a few hiccups along the way, but this is a great metaphor for life because that's what happens in life. We've had a chance to do some unhooking skills. We've had a chance to hopefully even just take a few moments to reflect on our values and sort of think about what we want to stand for. And this was all done with a purpose in mind. So we're now moving to the third handout, which is a 3 values exercise handout. But the only one I really want to focus on right now is the third question. So the third question on the second page, which asks you 1 year from now, looking back on this time, so thinking about the COVID and everything that we're going through right now, if 1 year doesn't seem long enough, make it 10 years, whatever you need to do. I want you to think back, assuming that you connected with your values and you lived your life completely in line with your values. How did you treat yourself and how did you treat others during this difficult time? So again, I'd like everyone to just take a moment to think about that. We'll keep going with the chat. If anybody wants to kind of pop in on the Zoom and make any comments, feedbacks, questions, please do. I like one of the comments, life is about learning what to hold on to and what to let go of. And the thing about all of these handouts is these are big questions. So if you're looking at this thinking, I have no idea, this is really about reflection. Values will change over time. The domains of life that become important to us will change over time, sometimes within the same day. If you find any of this helpful, I invite you to continue to play around with it, think about it, reflect on it. If you find it unhelpful, then just like with the leaves on a stream, just feel free to let it go. So my take-home message in all of this is act your values, not your fears. That doesn't mean that our emotions are our enemy, and I really want that message to be clear. Anxiety is not our enemy during this time. If we didn't have any anxiety, we wouldn't actually be taking any of the precautions that we're taking right now regarding COVID, because we frankly wouldn't care. It wouldn't be much of a concern. So anxiety is actually very helpful to us. And the work that we do, whether it's working with patients or clients or whatever work that you do, we can always bring in our values of how we want to treat others in that time. And it's also really important to be thinking about how we want to be treating ourselves during this time as well. That's our values coming in during this difficult time. If you're hoarding toilet paper or wrestling, I think there was a video of somebody wrestling an old lady for toilet paper, that's maybe not so helpful as a reaction to anxiety. And so again, it's not that we have to get rid of this, it's about getting some space from it so that we can reflect on what's going to be the most effective action right now. Another little strategy that you can use based on what we've done today is that we call it flavoring and savoring. So, you know, think of a value each morning that you want to connect with. So if you find the bullseye helpful, you know, pick it up each morning, pick a value and decide that you're going to really try to connect with that value and try to find ways to sprinkle it throughout your day. So that's sort of the flavoring, and then find ways to savor those moments. So becoming present, actually being there. Think about all the times in your life, you know, even before this, where you might be doing something that actually is really a great experience. But again, our minds are somewhere else. We're not present for the moments, even the good moments that we have. Another way you can try to savor is, you know, have a little journal at the end of the day and actually take a moment. It can even be a minute or two to think about how did I connect with some of my values today? Focus on the ways that you were able to connect with those values. And of course, 1 year from now, looking back, what did you choose to stand for during these difficult times? So this little quote at the bottom, I have no idea where it came from. You see it a lot in the ACT world, but when I Googled it, you also see it a lot in the pop culture world. So maybe somebody knows who actually said this, but I really like it, where it says, discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. So I think when we're going through difficult times, we're often trying to focus on how do I feel good? How do I get rid of this? What am I doing wrong? And the message of ACT is, it's not about getting rid of these feelings. It's about being able to be present with them and to take effective action. So I'm seeing a chat coming up, letting go is easier said than done. And that's absolutely the case. And so all of these unhooking skills that we're doing are ways to get a little bit of space, and letting go does not mean that it goes away. It means that it's still present and it maybe can come along with us. So can I feel anxious and still do my job? Can I feel distress and still choose to be compassionate to a family member? Can I feel all these thoughts about the things I have to do and still make a choice to engage in self-care? It doesn't have to be an either or. We can allow both to be present at the same time, but it is a practice. And so that's where I come back to where I started at the beginning. When you first pick up some of this stuff and you give it a try, you're not going to just run with it, and you're going to have to try it, play with it, see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. We do have another poll, so I do want to, at this point, ask people, we're going to put a poll on how likely you are to actually give this a try. So 1, meaning that you're just telling me that you kind of like it and you felt good, but there's no way you're actually going to do it. 5, meaning that even if tomorrow was a zombie apocalypse, you would be sitting there dropping anchor and reflecting on how you want to treat the zombies in line with your values. So take a moment, fill that out. We're going to take another look for chat. And again, please, if anybody wants to comment or ask questions, now would be a great time. We've got one chat, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I think that's wonderful and very human. All right, so I like these numbers. I can live with these numbers. This is just a nice little motivational strategy just to put it out there. It can be a nice way of trying to get a sense of how willing people are. You'd be amazed how many people, when I ask this question, actually smile at me sheepishly and say, yeah, I'm actually telling you I like it, but I'm not actually going to do it. So this is exciting. Let's give it a try. If anybody who is kind of in the 2 or 3 level is willing to give me some feedback about what would have to change in order to maybe boost it up to a 4, please do. I've been invited to come back a second time, and I'd love to make some changes based on any feedback that people have in terms of how useful this is, or things that would need to change in order to make it a little bit more useful, other than technological glitches, which we're working through. So if you did find this helpful and you want to learn more, I often say to people, don't go to the academic literature, go to the self-help literature. It's going to be much easier to take it in. So Russ Harris is kind of a superstar in the ACT world, and what he's famous for is making ACT simple. In fact, he's written a book called ACT Made Simple. ACT has a reputation for being kind of esoteric and confusing, and discovering Russ Harris has really changed my practice. So it's a really great book. If people do find that they do need more than what was talked about today, if you feel like, yeah, this is helping me, but I could use a little bit more, I just want to put these resources up there that the British Columbia Psychological Association, as well as the Canadian Psychological Association, have collectively gotten over 300 volunteer psychologists, registered psychologists, who are volunteering their time. BCPA is offering free psychological first aid, which is considered best practice during these times. So PFA is not therapy, it's not crisis intervention, it's more about kind of problem solving, just giving a listening ear, which sometimes is all that we need. 25 to 30 minutes would be long. It's usually going to be a lot shorter than that. So that's free and available anytime. They've also actually opened this up to beyond just healthcare workers. So if you happen to know anyone who just needs someone to talk to, you're allowed to use this resource as many times as you like, and everyone's going to try to get back to you within 24 hours of applying. CPA is doing brief psychological services. This one is just for healthcare workers. So you just have to make sure you contact someone in British Columbia, because we also can only practice in our province. And so both of these, I've got the websites listed, or you can just Google Canadian Psychological Association COVID-19 and click on the Psychology Works for COVID, or Google BCPA and click on the COVID-19. So we have one last poll. So I want, just kind of like at the beginning, we asked how alive and how present do you feel. We're going to put that poll up again and just see whether anything's changed for anyone. And while we're doing that, again, we're going to come back to some of the discussion, and if anybody wants to comment, question, please feel free. So we've got some suggestions. One suggestion wanting some point form of how to practice some of this stuff. I think we could certainly put something together on that. And I'm not sure about the recording. Is this going to be recorded?
So recordings do go up on our link to our webpage. So we can just confirm that with Petra.
I think there's also been a posting. Petra was saying that you can email other suggestions. So if anybody's afraid to tell me what they really think, feel free to let Petra know what they really think, and she'll give me the anonymous version of it. Are there any questions, comments, reactions, feedback?
Thank you, Catherine. It's Harsh here. I think this is really, as Mike said, this is really timely, but it really points out that in times of great uncertainty, it's really being in touch with our values and being in touch with the principles that guide us will actually get us through, rather than some checklist or becoming too focused on the particular activity. At the end of the day, I think that's really important. And the other thing I think you really point out is being present in the moment. Children know when you're not present, and patients do as well. So it's really a gift to the people we care for if we can calm ourselves and be present in the moment, and it makes us more effective. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other last comments or questions before we finish up? Yeah, it has struck me through these sessions, Catherine. Thank you so much for that. Just in the chat, how much collective wisdom there is in groups of people who are committed to doing this work, and I'm really careful not to say, well, it's just about showing up and being present with what it is that you're doing, and the commitment to that. You know, that kind of language speaks of certainly some of my values. And certainly this COVID response, I think in some difficult times, really in these prolonged weeks, many of us have interacted with other people's values and sometimes seen some conflicts. But we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you taking the time in the last hour to be with us. But also, I think to show the value that you see in this kind of work. And we're looking forward to thinking about how to continue this. The alarming rates of physician burnout, exhaustion, disenchantment with their careers is really concerning across North America. And pieces of work like this, I think, are just one small piece from the grassroots to help us work through the challenges that we're all facing in different ways. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you for your comments. We take those to heart. We will have another session in 2 weeks. If this has been helpful, please let your colleagues know, and we'd love to welcome more people to the session. So unless there are any other burning questions, I'll leave it quiet for 20 seconds. We will call it a night.